One of the first principles of public speaking that I learned was know your audience. And knowing that this is an Army event with a very Army-oriented crowd, I won't tell any Army jokes. But I will point out, as a Naval Academy grad, I can't even claim an Army-Navy game football score this year. We didn't come through last December, but looking forward to good things here coming up in a couple months. So if you could, thank you. How I want to begin is giving you I want to start, again, knowing my audience and knowing that Army-centric audience. I want to just give a scene setter about the Marine Corps. You can see here I've got our roles and missions, and I won't read the slide to you. You can see the points there, but what I want to do here is start by defining some terms. The first term I want to define is naval. The naval services collectively are the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. You know, when we talk about Navy and Navy capabilities, that's one thing. But when we talk about naval, we're talking about the collective group of the three services that operate primarily in the maritime domain. The Marine Corps, of course, recently spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan in what was almost entirely a land-based campaign. I think we acquitted ourselves well there. But coming out of there, around 2014, the service recognized that we want to get back to our amphibious roots, back to our naval roots, and so we've done that. And in 2014, there was a concept published called Expeditionary Force 21, and now the Marine Corps operating concept, which I'm talking to today, is the follow-on to that Expeditionary Force 21 concept. Builds on that, as well as some previous concepts known as operational maneuver from the sea, ship to objective maneuver, and sea basing. The next term I'd like to address here is in bold on the slide: combined arms. When the Marine Corps employs, we always try to employ using a combined arms approach that's using multiple means of engagement, whereby you hit the enemy from more than one angle with more than one type of capability in a manner that, in order to defend against one of those engagements, he has to leave himself vulnerable to the other. Puts him on the horns of a dilemma, and ultimately defeat comes through the employment of combined arms. Air-ground task forces. Anytime the Marine Corps employs and goes into operations, we deploy as a MAGTAF, a Marine Air-Ground Task Force. And what a MAGTAF is a combined arms team that's task organized under a single commander in order to take care of a mission. So, for instance, we've got three different sizes of MAGTAF: the Marine Expeditionary Force being the largest, Marine Expeditionary Brigade, and Marine Expeditionary Unit. And when those units are formed, they're task organized based on the mission. So you'll almost always see infantry as part of that task organization, but you might or might not see tanks, you might or might not see artillery, and therefore, again, the task organized nature of the MAGTAF. Expeditionary force and readiness. To be expeditionary is to be light enough to be able to go on a moment's notice and be able to deploy and then employ your forces to accomplish a mission. So when the Marine Corps says we're expeditionary, we are in fact light, flexible enough to do that, and lethal enough to accomplish a mission. However, if for whatever reason the mission is larger than the capability that we take forward, we certainly are at least able to buy time and options for that combatant commander to send in follow-on forces. A great example of that would be in waging a large land campaign. If we were to deploy that from the sea, the Marine Corps would establish the initial lodgement and naval landing space, where then larger forces could follow on afterward. And again, force and readiness, you can see there toward the bottom, fifth bullet, talking about the Marine Corps' charge under law is to be the most ready when the nation is generally the least ready. So we are your expeditionary force and readiness. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the Marine operating concept is oriented on what the Marine Corps has called the future operating environment. Taking a look at both the current landscape of what the world and what our potential crisis situations are, and what the future most likely holds, looking about a 10-year time horizon. These 5 drivers of change here are what we expect to see and what we expect to need to fight or defend against. Contested domains. All 5 warfighting domains, sea, air, land, space, and cyber, certainly, in my opinion, are contested today, and I think we can look forward to seeing those being contested in the future as we look forward. In air, certainly, we've got 5th-generation fighters now that we can claim air superiority in a conventional sense. But then when you read about things like unmanned aerial systems and other newer technologies that are coming out, rather asymmetric there, and so there's no assurance that our 5th-generation fighters are going to be able to defend against some of those other threats that are out there. In space, certainly there's a number of nations and other actors that have an anti-space capability, as well as the ability to deny a spectrum and deny our ability to operate with our satellite systems. On land, again, lots of asymmetric threats out there. Just one easy example that everyone's familiar with is the improvised explosive device. Not going away. We can fully expect to see our next enemy or adversary employ those against us as well. We continue to look at ways we can best overcome those, but ultimately, we haven't solved the problem yet, per se. In the maritime domain, anti-access area denial fully in play in pretty much all the littoral areas of the world, and again, highly contested domain for us naval services. Cyber, no doubt. We've heard a number of presentations today already talking about the cyber threat. State and non-state actors have a lot of very easily available, very, very affordable ways to use the cyber realm against us and essentially wage cyber warfare against us. So again, highly contested domain. By no means do we enjoy superiority in the cyber domain. So moving on, complex terrain. Primarily what the marine operating concept talks about there is the urban environment. The urban warfare, urban operations almost always are going to require a large amount of forces with a high expectation of a high number of casualties. When you're talking about fighting from room to room, house to house, building to building, not an easy task, and certainly pretty lethal in most cases. As well, just dealing with some of the aspects of RF communication. The urban canyon presents plenty of challenges there, and not to mention the fact that most of the places that we're anticipating fighting, a lot of disadvantaged areas where there is no expectation of a cellular network or Wi-Fi or anything that's going to be resident in the area. Lots of challenges, both in the warfare itself and in the command and control aspects. Technology proliferation. Again, I mentioned the availability and the ease of anyone to obtain cyber tools that can pretty much turn my webcam on my laptop into a spy camera, all the way up to taking down critical infrastructure. So certainly the proliferation of technology is not always working in our favor, and certainly has taken away the technological advantage that the United States may have appreciated in years past. Information as a weapon. We look at Iraq and Afghanistan again, and it's pretty easy to see that we had Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, doing a lot of acts of terror. It was very easy for them to videotape a beheading or a mass killing and post that directly to the internet with almost no delay. Meanwhile, our own information cycle struggled to keep up with that and struggled to counter that. It was all too easy for our adversaries to show themselves in some kind of humanitarian act, taking care of the populace, providing clean water, providing aid of whatever sort, and again, post that publicly. Meanwhile, they portray the Americans as the ugly imperialists who are trotting on friendly ground. Finally, the battle of signatures. Obviously talking about the electromagnetic spectrum there, and hotly, first of all, even in a peacetime sense here domestically, lots of spectrum use, spectrum saturation, frankly, and very hard to carve out what the military needs in order to operate and accomplish our training missions in peacetime, let alone getting out again into to places where there's an adversary working against us, trying to deny us spectrum. Again, those tools are all too readily available. So you can see the problem statement there at the bottom. The Marine Corps needs to make some adjustments in order to get after this. Next, please. So the Marine operating concept. Again, I alluded to it earlier. This is our latest concept, published about a year ago. And first word there, it describes. It is a descriptive document, not prescriptive. This is a concept of how the Marine Corps ought to be looking to operate in the next 10 years. Quite honestly, right here, 2025, only 8 years away. But roughly a 10-year time horizon. These are the types of things that the Marine Corps wants to be looking at and how we want to reshape ourselves in order to address these challenges. A couple of things I'll point out toward the bottom of the slide: information warfare. Information warfare is threaded throughout the MOC, and that really is critical to any 21st century operations that we're going to undertake. And I don't just mean cyber, but cyber, of course, being a big portion of information warfare. But it's a whole array of other capabilities, including military deception, special technical operations, public affairs, civil military operations, information operations. All those things are at play. The third bullet down talks about avoiding linear, sequential, and phased approaches to operations. And what I'll just say about that is a quick vignette. About 5-6 years ago, I was stationed in the Pacific area of responsibility. And when we were out there, we would talk about how, in a kinetic sense, in a conventional sense, pretty much everywhere in the Pacific was at phase 0 when you look at the phases of a joint operation. We were in the shaping phase. There was no kinetic threat per se, but at the same time, we knew that there were actors out there that were prosecuting active cyber attacks on a moment-by-moment basis. So the way we talked about it was, in the cyber domain, we were at phase 2, phase 3, seize the initiative and dominate every day. And I would suggest that in today's world, no matter what geographic area we're talking about, that's the case. We're at phase 0 in pretty much every place that we're looking at operate that we're present today. But in the cyber domain, phase 2, phase 3. Next slide, please. So what the MOC lays out is 5 critical tasks. And I'm going to focus today on task number 3, and then I'll touch a little bit on task number 4, because that's where the cyber portion of the MOC really is resident and really comes home. Next, please. So in the MOC, those 5 tasks are then divided into subtasks. And so at the top of the slide is where I'm going to spend most of my time. That's signature. We talk about, well, first of all, I'll back up. The critical task 6.3 talks about resilience in a contested network environment. So I'll just say a word about resilience, just to clarify, again, define terms. Resilience doesn't always mean hardened and encrypted and impenetrable. Really, more resilience implies a lot of flexibility, the ability to adapt, and again, when those domains are contested, we can't always count on superiority, so we need to be able to operate in other ways, and even when certain capabilities are denied. So kind of like that tree that's at the top of a windy mountaintop, it can't just be hard and brittle because the first big storm that comes through is going to snap that top of that tree right off. Rather, you want flexibility. That tree needs to be able to bend in order to withstand the winds and the storms and live another day. So the subtasks under the resilient network deal with signature in the offense and defense. And I mentioned earlier about the electromagnetic spectrum. Signature is primarily what we're talking about. Lots of our networks and our nodes are centers of gravity. When we talk about employing the Marine Corps, of course, any force that's going to be employed needs command and control. And we do that through our networks. But I'll say that, again, if for whatever a myriad of reasons that network is degraded or denied us, every Marine understands commander's intent. Every Marine is given an understanding, and we have a culture of mission type orders where at the outset of an operation, every Marine is told what is the mission that they're expected to accomplish, and in that mission is a statement of the commander's intent, which ends with a sentence that starts, final result desired. So when communication is denied completely and there's no other guidance coming from higher, that Marine knows what the end state is, that he needs that final result desired. So he or she can operate without further communication or command and control because they understand the mission and the intent. Networking for rapid and precise fires, and the operative word there in a cyber sense is networking, of course. You need those networks from our unmanned systems, from our sensors, from all the other intelligence and information sources out there. But I'll say that, precise fires, of course, preferred when we can get them. We talk about, for years, we've heard about surgical strikes. We want the ability to put steel on target in exactly the right location and not have to expend more rounds than we need to. However, there will be times when we don't have the ability, we don't have the capabilities to put that precise targeting in place. So rather, we fall back to massing fires, and we send them quickly. We send them to the place we know that that those effects need to take place, and we move on. Pushing processing power to the tactical edge. This is something that technology is enabling, and I would liken it to the Internet of Things. There are now, we've been able to miniaturize our technology and put the processing power and frankly, just the power in a conventional sense out at the edge of our networks, so that there can be a certain amount of measuring, metering, even analysis and machine learning applied out at the edge of the network, so that it doesn't all have to communicate back to the mothership, back to the main server. Those lines of connectivity are not always necessary, because we can do a lot out at the edge and not have to depend on our connectivity. Finally, an enhanced concept of intelligence. And what that really boils down to is an approach where the Marine Corps says, let's look at there's a plethora of knowledge available now through social media, through open source intelligence. So let's leverage that, and let's take advantage of what we already know from what's already out there, and let's use classified information only when absolutely necessary to augment what we can already get from the open source. And quite frankly, that will make the turn cycle a whole lot faster. So that's critical task 3. Critical task 4 includes several different subtasks. Again, in a cyber sense, I just wanted to hone in on subtask number 2, a broader concept of combined arms and information warfare. And I'm gonna zoom right in on information warfare. Then again, I alluded to information warfare earlier, and we're talking about all these different aspects. There's actually 13 different capabilities that the Marine Corps brings together when we consider information warfare. Substantively, what the Marine Corps has done is, just in July of this year, we formally established a Deputy Commandant for Information. So that's a 7th Deputy Commandant position, the primary staff officers of the Commandant, if you will. And so that Deputy Commandant for Information is responsible for bringing together those 13 elements of information warfare in the Marine Corps and synchronizing all the efforts, because there was a lot of stovepiping going on between those different elements. Say, for instance, communications, again, military deception, public affairs, all those different areas were not talking to each other, not synchronizing their efforts. And so that's what we've done, is bring them together under a single hat, if you will. And that's furthermore, it's looking at this subtask is looking at things like how do we employ our cyber protection teams as a maneuver element. Interesting concept, and again, concept that we're going to need to continue to experiment and develop in order to find out how we best leverage that. Maintaining access and being able to use our electromagnetic spectrum in the time and place of our choosing. So again, the notion is not that we're going to have superiority in the electromagnetic spectrum or in any aspect of information warfare on a continuous basis, but at certain places and times when it's critical to the mission, we figure out how to overpower that enemy for a given period of time or a given sector of the battlefield and bring it to bear. Next slide, please. Another substantive action that I want to convey to you about cyber and what the Marine Corps is doing relative to cyber and the Marine operating concept is modernizing our communication and information systems occupational field, our 06XX MOSs. What we're doing there, and this, by the way, within the Marine Corps, this is the first occupational field that's taken the 21st century reality and moving out by modernizing our training approach. So you can see here on the slide, there's an old paradigm and then the current reality. That old paradigm really harkens back to about World War II, where we had, until recently, we had radio Marines, we had wire Marines, and we had data systems Marines. Today, what we've done is it made a clear recognition that that wire Marine, which primarily was telephone systems, those Marines are now employing an H323 IP telephony network. So they're network Marines just as much as any of the other Marines that are doing either data systems or transmission systems. It's all IP based now, so that's why big driver of the transition. In fact, the training approach has to do with reflecting the OSI model in the approach to training. So just as to kind of sum up what happens here in the modernized 06 training pipeline, every Marine comes in and goes through a basic communications course where they learn electrical theory, electronics, and IP networking from the OSI layer and the foundational levels of networking. From there, then they branch out into their specialties. Once again, this was just a means of getting after Expeditionary Force 21 and now the Marine operating concept. And you can see there, defensive cyber operations, formerly termed information assurance, is a part and parcel of the approach. So that's really my final slide, but what I'd like to do for a moment is just once again summarize that the MOC recognizes information warfare will be an integral part of future operations, and by extension, cybersecurity, cyber warfare, and absolutely integral to what we're going to do in the 21st century. So I'll just leave off with a couple of hypothetical questions. The first is, we look again. I harken back to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'll just put it out there. Did we win? Did we win the information warfare? And looking forward, will we have information superiority? And do we have it today? So the Marine Corps is making changes to our organization, to our training, to our leadership in order to get after the Marine operating concept. I didn't talk much about Critical Task 5, but Critical Task 5 has to do with the individual Marine and leveraging the capabilities and the competence of the individual Marine. And if a network is comprised of people, processes, and information, then our people are what make the network and what make it what it is. Well-trained, liberally educated to think in complex situations. So ultimately, it's our people. It's our Marines that are going to sustain our proud heritage and win our country's battles. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I know you have the MEF information group coming online right now, but what are you doing to maybe integrate cyber effects to your MAGTF formations? Kind of within traditional MAGTF and Marine operations.
The question was, we have a MAGTF integration group as part of the MAGTF construct now, and what is the Marine Corps do into our operations? I'll say, we're looking at we've got cyber protection teams that are based out of Marforce Cyber. They're up at Cybercom. We have cyber protection teams that participate in a number of our exercises today. We primarily look to the cyber protection teams when we talk about cyber in a cyber operations sense. Now, again, I'll just I alluded to it on the presentation, but the cyber defense, information assurance, formerly known as information assurance, as well as DODN operations. Basically the Marine Corps portion of the DODN is the Marine Corps Enterprise Network, and that's what the 06XX modernization really gets at is better training those Marines to operate the MCPA. So the answer would be all three of those aspects.
What about offensive capability? Are you looking to integrate some offensive effects and a tactical and cyber perspective?
Question was, are we looking to implement offensive cyber into our operations? And honestly, I really can't comment on that. Okay, lastly, I did want to make an acknowledgement. I had significant help from a couple of gentlemen, Mr. Tony Greco and Mr. Paul Stokes, in assembling this slide deck today. And I appreciate the team effort that came behind me here to bring me here today. Thank you.